All right, so now you have your big watercolor paper gridded every 2 inches. It's a 15 by 20 sheet. On the top, there's no border whatsoever. It goes straight to the edge. On the bottom, there's no border whatsoever. It goes straight off the bottom. On the two sides of your big paper, you have an extra half of an inch on either side. That's it. If that bothers you, cut it off. Just chop it off with a scissor before you even start. If it doesn't, fine, but put tape over it so you don't get confused. You want to make sure that you're not using that little half inch of the paper, but you're definitely going flush to the top and bottom. The grid on there is 2 by 2. The grid on here is 1 on 1. There's 7 units, and there's 10 units on this, 14 units and 20 on that. Very straightforward. We're not using a center because it doesn't match up for the center, because you have 7 and 10. The center is actually halfway and halfway. It never hurts to find it though, just so you know. It's just that you're not building a grid around the center. So if you were to travel in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 3.5, we know that this area somewhere in here is going to be the center, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 hits here. 1, 2, 3. Okay, so if you take a little colored pencil and put a dot, even though we're not building the grid from the center out, it's really great to know where that is, that point where everything else meets up. Double checking 3.5, 3.5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There we go. That's the center. Have a bunch of colored pencils out because you can use those to double check angles and things like that. You're familiar with the grid. It's totally fine to start by putting all your lines and transferring all your details. But in order to make this look lifelike and realistic, we have to move beyond those lines. Those lines are really great to set it all up and to get yourself situated, but especially with these ellipses, the reason they look weird as a grid line is they have highs and lows of value, and that's something you're going to paint in. And unless you really carefully trace every little outer edge, which you can do, it's going to look weird. But if you do that, it's still going to look weird unless you get them in the exact right spot. I can tell you right off the bat, this is the hardest thing in the entire painting. This is the second hardest. The other stuff is hard too, but this, if you get these off, it totally will mess up the whole thing. So do your grid, push it, do your lines, get your stuff together, just like you did with the balloon. Get everything mapped out. But from there, we have to really break it down gesturally. First thing is that linear perspective we talked about. You want to line up what you can see as converging bottle tops. This looks about right to me. That looks about right to me. And then take if you can connect it off the table, that's even better. But if not, you can at least estimate that line. And then this one, the edge of this, and what you can see, which is hard to see, but the edge of this. Now this edge goes all the way to here, so it's a little tricky. Even if they look parallel, you have to know that linear perspective, this has to get smaller. You can't have that parallel, because then you're going to get in trouble with the way it looks is going to be funky. So when you draw that line, just measure and go, okay, this one's this far apart. This one's wider, even so slightly. As long as it's slightly further apart here as here, you've just solved all of this. And then this line is easy. This line is going to eventually meet these two lines, way out in space. Same thing though, if it's wider here than here, like if you drag a pencil from here to here and you hold it here, and as you drag it up you find you have to slip your fingers in a little, then you know that it's headed the right direction. These are all just ways to help you figure it out. Now this one's going to go this way, and make the lines on there so that you can see them. can always reprint that thing if it gets too crazy. But see how they're coming together? Same thing. If it's this far apart here, and as I slide up, if it stays the same width on the pencil, I know I'm doing something wrong. So I'm getting good now. I feel like I'm okay with that. And then I see this other line here. And of course, it's a blurry line, so we're not going to ever paint it, you know, distinct. But now I have this conversion with this conversion with that. So now, oh, and then there's this one, which is also going to converge, and then this one, which is also going to converge, and then this one. There's a lot of linear perspective in here. Just like the interior study that you did. Not this is not on it. So there, I have just now broken this thing down just based on one thing about it. I don't know what this is. Anyway, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. We'll deal with that later. I don't even know if this is... I don't know what this is, and I don't think we should use it, but we'll get to that later. Point is that now I have this, going to this, going to this, going to this, going to that, going to that, going to that. All visually headed to the same direction. And then the flip side, these are going that way. These two things are really the only ones going that other direction. So in this context, I have now just resolved a huge, huge part of this drawing. I now know where my center dot hits in relation to these marks that I just made. See how these lines fall now on the grid, these red lines? Now that I feel good about them, I'm going to make them stronger. And red is going to be linear perspective for this project. When I switch to things like ellipses or whatever else, different color. So this is step one. And wherever these things crisscross, make a note, make a little X, make a dot, something. Because after you do this red part, we're going to transfer the red lines onto a tracing paper drawing of your image. So your 15 by 20 watercolor paper, you will have done this on tracing paper first. Even if it's on 2 sheets or just sketch paper. But we're going to, okay, so here's red. Linear perspective. We've got this. Mark it up. Do what you need to do. This printout, this black and white printout, this is your starting point. This is your introduction to this. This is your, you know, your way to make a lot of messy marks. You know, you can push that gesture a lot farther than you can push the grid. The grid can really let you down. If you miss one little angle or you get one little square design wrong, you're right back to square one. So this is really a great next step. And you can do this right on top of your grid study on your sketch paper, or you can do this first. And look how I'm drawing through. Draw through everything. People always stop short. If you go off the paper, onto the table, off the edges, that's how you get drawings to be accurate. Because if you try to fit anything into a little area, it gets distorted. So do this, 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 and this. Okay, now put a little a moment where you do it. Each one that crosses, put a dot. And that dot falls in some way in this. Since this is the most difficult thing in the whole project, do this first. Map this out. This is the doozer right here. This is the doozer. I mean, you can wrap it with fluorescent whatevers, but you got to figure this out. Now, the good news is, see how this square is almost cut in half by this line that we made for the linear perspective? Take a yellow or something. I mean, there's a little lip here, but we can pretend it's not just for now. Fill this triangle. Then you've got, this is the literally the focal point of the entire composition. If you can get this right, everything else will fall into play. Starting with this square. This triangle helps you figure out where this falls. And then we'll do the same thing when we get over to this area. Because these two things need to be resolved. Otherwise they'll get totally distorted and the whole thing's gonna fall apart. What you would do next now is transfer all of these red lines exactly as they fall onto the big sketch paper. The best way to do that is put an X where they hit the border there, which is B 2/3 up. And then it hits here right at the division of F and G. Perfect. Boom. Connect. This one hits 2/3 up B, goes all the way to exactly H and I hit. Boom. I'm pleased about that. Connect. Same thing, 7. It has to be extended though. If you don't extend them, you don't get to have that tool of the edges. Every single line you made, you got to extend them, get exactly where they hit. There's another great one right at the corner. And then connect them all, and then you're good to set up your structure for your drawing.